Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about gravity and why gravity is perhaps the most important thing in our ability to maintain the wellness of our brain and our nervous system. So, not necessarily just gravity, but our perception of gravity is super, super important. Now, why is that? Well, if you go to the expression use it or lose it, which is kind of haunting but true, if you don't activate cells in the brain, then they will slowly start to die. Now, there's lots of different functions of the brain, and it's kind of a harrowing thought that if you don't use every part of your brain, that you might lose it. Well, there's a little trick in how we have developed over the millions of years of evolution, whereby our nervous system is being activated by a constant stimulation. So gravity is really the only thing that's constant in our experience and within our lives. Light comes and goes, sounds come and go. Imagine a world where if you didn't see something or you didn't hear for something for a while, that your brain would just degenerate and you'd lose your sense of vision or you'd lose your sense of hearing. That doesn't happen because those parts of the brain are being kept alive almost by like kind of a trickle charger is the way I like to look at it. There's just a little bit of activation that's coming from a specific type of sensor. And those sensors are the ones that are responding to the effects of gravity. So the effects of gravity are being turned into electrical signals, and those electric signals are activating the many, many different parts of our brain and keeping all of our brain alive and active. So these are very, very old systems of stimulation. And in fact, they date back about 400 million years, I believe. You can fact check me on that. But I believe it first developed in jellyfish 400 million years ago. And jellyfish have really just kind of one sense of where they are in the world, and that is just telling them which way they're tilting. And the way they determine which way they're tilting is by a system called an otolith. And an otolith is actually something we have in our ears as well. We have in our inner ear a little sensor, which is like little hairs with crystals on the end, and the crystals have weight to them. So as you tilt to the side, the weight of the crystals, because of gravity, bends the hairs, and then it activates the neurons that are connected to it, the sensors that are basically creating electrical signal, telling you that you're tilting one way or you're tilting the other way. So that's something that exists within jellyfish, and it exists within us. It gives us a sense of which way we're tilting in gravity. And that's constantly giving information to the jellyfish and stimulating its nervous system. And it works the same way in us. Gravity is constantly kind of loading us. Even if we're sitting still, there's a constant load of gravity, and the sensors are constantly giving information to our brain. They're called tonic receptors, and tonic means they're just constantly going boom, 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 turning the effect of gravity into an electrical signal, and that electrical signal is activating different parts of our brain, some very specifically and some very intensely, and others in just kind of a trickle charging way. But it's that stimulation, that constant stimulation of gravity, that is actually and truly using every part of our brain, not necessarily to making it do things, but just keeping those cells alive and active. So why is this important? Well, the reason is because we have quite a big brain and it requires quite a lot of electricity. So as we have evolved over the millennia, we have developed a bigger brain, partly because we've found newer and newer ways of generating more information due to the effects of gravity. So as we go from being in the sea creatures, to being land creatures, once you get on the land, there's more of an effect of gravity, so that's creating more stimulation. Once you start to stand up and try to defeat gravity, your body's falling to the ground all the time, essentially, and you're having to be able to have some very refined sensors telling you which way gravity's pulling you, and to be able to contract muscles to bring you back to a balance point. So as we developed more brain and more ability to try to defeat gravity, that extra sensation that we're getting by standing up is actually creating more electrical activation and more evolution of these of these brain areas of our brain. So they both go hand in hand, and which came first, it's hard to say, but as we developed the ability to do certain things, we exercise those abilities, we develop more and more and more growth and more activation of new functions. So what we're born into as a being has a brain and a nervous system, which is very, very dependent on this activation from gravity. And it's very important that we stand up and very important that we move around, because it's these types of sensations and this interaction with gravity that is actually driving the health and the wellness of our brain. If we stop moving or we stop stimulating ourselves in this field of gravity, then things start to degenerate quite quickly. And you can see this when people first started going into space. They go off into space, and guess what? No gravity in space. They're just floating around, and they don't have any impact from gravity. There's no load. Their otolith isn't telling them which way they're tilting. The sensors the pressure sensors in their joints, and even the stretch receptors in their muscles aren't getting activated as much. So what happens is they get less and less of that activation of their brain, and they come back a little bit funny. You used to see, like when I was growing up in the 80s, you'd see these people coming off the space shuttle, and they weren't running around and having a great time. They'd sit them down right away, and they'd take a little while to recuperate. And the longer people were in space, the more these effects were seen. So we know very, very clearly that the effect of gravity on us is a very positive one. But there's a little twist here, is that sometimes that system doesn't work very well. Sometimes we don't get the right amount of stimulation. Sometimes we don't get enough stimulation to those receptors, and then we start to see some of this degeneration. So what does that look like? Well, that looks like people that don't manage gravity very well, people that are falling and wobbling a little more. You see people that are wobbling more. People get older, and that whole system, they start to oscillate more, because what's happening is their brain isn't as able to respond quickly to which way they're tilting and bending. So most young people have very, very good activation of the sensors. So as their body starts to tilt a little bit, they can bring themselves right back up. And you don't even see it. It's happened so quickly. But older people, if these sensors aren't giving good information, their body ends up tilting more before they can start to respond to bring themselves back. And you start to see the bigger movement. So as those load sensors are not giving as clear or as much information, you start to see a bigger oscillation. Okay, so that's one thing that happens. So why is that? What's behind that? The simple answer is traumas. When people have slips and falls and traumas, what ends up happening is you have a sort of a big force into the body, and that force is beyond the body's ability to resist it. So like normally if someone pushes you, you kind of move and you come back. It's not a big deal. It's not traumatizing. However, if that force was big enough, your body can't cope with that force, and that force can actually create a stretch on a muscle, which changes its state. So in other words, instead of it kind of springing back to its normal space, keeping the joint in a balanced way, that force can be so great that it actually resets that muscle to a new length. We call it resetting the gain of the muscle. This is what happens in a trauma. So very, very high degree of force, very, very fast motion, like someone slips and falls on their pelvis, boom, they get pushed to the side, and it stretches a muscle, and then that muscle stays longer. And then you end up with this imbalance. There's other videos I've done on the effects of trauma, so watch those. I won't go into it now. But these traumas leave the joints in kind of weird positions. And when the joint is in an inadequate or improper position due to that trauma, it's going to give different information to the brain about where gravity is. This joint thinks that gravity is pulling it in one direction. So it's going to tell the brain, gravity is over here. Whereas the other joints are saying, no, gravity's in this direction. And then you might have another trauma in another joint that's saying gravity is coming from another direction. So as these traumas build up and they're not being resolved, we can end up with situations where we have kind of aberrant information going to our brain. There's good information, which we call signal, and then there's this bad information from these traumatized joints that we call noise. So we have more and more noise in the system, and effectively less signal, or more noise than we need, basically clouding the signal. So when you have noise and signal at the same time, your brain doesn't have a very good sense of where reality is, where is gravity. So when it comes to tasks like being able to hold your body together, you bend or tilt or go to pick something up, and you need the information from those sensors to tell you where gravity is, and to be able to effectively create a response to contract muscles to stabilize your joints. If that system has been thrown off by these traumas, we'll see that the person is less capable of responding well to gravity, and the joints will start to be compromised in their stability. Our movements will become larger oscillations. Okay, so there's many things that can happen as a result of these traumas to the joints and this noise. Another thing that happens is when you have this sort of confused information about where gravity is coming from. So each joint is essentially giving a sense of where the vector of gravity is. It should be going straight down. But if the joints are all twisted about, the sort of summation, if you will, of where the gravity vector is clouded with lots of noise. So we have to start using other sensors like our vision to figure out where the horizon is. If the horizon looks like it's this, then it might mean that we're tilted this way. So our body's going to use vision more to try to, we're going to upregulate that vision to try to gain a clearer sense of what is signal and what is noise. And this creates quite a lot of overhead in the brain. The brain's always having to work a bit harder to figure out where you are. And we see this very commonly in older people as well. They go to the toilet in the night and they're slipping and falling and having real difficulty just being able to stand up and walk to the toilet, because they're relying so much on their vision to figure out where they are because of all these traumas that haven't been resolved, that it ends up being very difficult to know where they are and to be able to respond appropriately. It's also very common in people that have just simple bending, twisting, picking things up. If when you're bending over, your body has to sense where gravity is and to create a strong response to stabilize your joints. And when these gravity sensors have been affected in this way due to traumas, our response isn't great enough. So we start to see weaknesses in the spine wherever there's these traumas, usually in the vector of where that trauma was. So if the trauma sort of threw the joint in one direction and you bend in that direction, you're going to be moving in an area that's less capable of being able to facilitate a proper stabilization. So this is what we're looking for when we're examining patients, is to try to understand what are those compromised gravity vectors, and to try to feel the joints and see where those vectors are. So if the joint is actually stuck in a certain position, we know that that's a traumatized vector, and the muscles are out of balance in that way. There's many videos I've done on this, you can watch those, but the essential point is that we can resolve that by trying to create a greater, to release the tension of the muscle that's holding it out of balance, to try to create a better balance of those stabilizing muscles so the joint can return to its neutral position and do so with greater stability. So whenever we're resolving these joints, not only are we moving the joint, we're bringing it back towards a neutral position and creating greater stability in the spine, and also resolving the brain's overhead of trying to figure out what's noise, and also to have a very fast response. So our body can be stronger and more stable just simply by resolving these issues in the joints. So that's what I do. That's my job, and many other chiropractors doing similar things. You probably have the question, what can you do for yourself? So there's a really great answer to that, and I'm going to just leave you with that for today, is dance. And I mean dance, not tango dance exactly the way it's supposed to be on your sort of typical sort of dance professionals, but dance like a fool. Like literally just put music on, something that you really love that makes your body want to move, and just dance like an absolute idiot. That is the most amazing therapy, because what you're doing is you're kind of bypassing your brain's planning functions, and you're really tuning into what your body's feeling. So you're kind of putting all of your your brain's energy into feeling your body, and you'll feel little tensions and things. And if it's good music, you'll kind of find a way to move that feels good. That's going to create a lot of stimulation for your brain and start activating things. And at the same time, you're creating more metabolism and more activation, blood flow, and all the muscles. Everything's going to be feeling very, very good. It's switching all the systems on. But at the same time, you're probably going to feel little areas where there's some tension. Sometimes it'll feel not so good to go into that tension, but then you'll find other areas of tension where it feels really good to go into that tension. So just explore those motions and kind of just feel what feels good to you. And as music is playing, just explore it, have fun with it. And I can assure you that if you're doing that, and you're doing it on a regular basis, that you will start to unravel a lot of the compensations around these traumas, and even perhaps get into resolving the traumas at their core as well. So there are many ways to unravel a trauma. One is with like a fast stretch type of motion that we do in chiropractic, and others are with sort of slower loads and doing things in slow and rhythmic ways. So in terms of what you can do for yourself, the best advice I can give is just dance like a fool. So I hope it's been interesting and entertaining for you. If you have any questions, share them in the comments, and I'll be glad to address them. And I'll probably be talking more about this in the future. If you want to see more about trauma, there's loads of other videos I have, so just check into my channel and you'll see lots more on that. Thanks for watching.